Welcome, I'm Kamla. My guests today are Dolores Huerta and Peter Bratt. They are involved with a documentary called Dolores, which is a film, a documentary about Dolores herself. We'll find out more about Dolores Huerta and how they got to make this film. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, Kamla.
Thank you.
Dolores, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
So what does it feel like being in San Francisco celebrating your birthday?
Oh, wonderful place to be. I worked here in San Francisco during the Great Boycott and came here as a youngster when I used to drive from Stockton, where I was raised. So it's always good to be back in San Francisco, in the city.
What is the Great Boycott?
Well, the Great Boycott, we had about 17 million people that stopped eating grapes to support the farm workers who were striking in Delano, California.
Oh, the grape boycott. Okay, I heard it as great. Okay. And Peter, how are you helping celebrate her birthday?
I'm partying here with you and her right now.
About the film, right?
Where is the cake?
No, we actually at the San Francisco premiere last night at the Castro Theater, we had an after party, but we also had a cake at the Q&A after the screening, celebrated with over 1,000 people, and then we carried on the party into the wee hours of the morning, and wow, I don't even know how we made it here this morning, but...
So she really makes you run. How does she stay so young and vibrant? Did she give you all a run for your money when you were making the documentary?
You know, I have to say, and this is on a serious note, you know, you hear, I grew up as a child being aware of Dolores and Cesar, and so in my mind they were folk heroes. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of trepidation when, oh my God, you're actually going to meet the person and I'm going to spend time with her, we're going to make this story. And there's a little bit of fear that maybe that person won't meet your expectations because your expectations are so great. And after 4 years, I have to tell you that she's the real deal. My admiration and respect for her has only grown.
What did you learn in the 4 years that you spent making this documentary?
I feel like, well, the farm worker movement and the Chicano movement inspired my family and myself to feel that I actually have a place in this country and that my story and my family's story and the color of my skin is okay, and is not only okay, but it's something to be proud of. And so I got that from Dolores and Cesar's example. They kind of ignited a spark. And so for me during this process, and particularly today, when communities like mine are made to feel like we don't really have a place here, or we really are not part of the American story, when people are kind of pushing that narrative, to me, this story is even more important and crucial now, more than ever.
So one of the things I think many of us didn't know was that Dolores was the co-founder, along with Cesar, of the farm workers movement. Why do you think that is? That most of us didn't know about it, unless you are a native Californian. When you think of the farm workers movement, especially from today's perspective?
You know, I think when Europeans first arrived here on the eastern seaboard, they engaged the Iroquois Confederacy, which was a matriarchal society, but because they were coming from a patriarchal culture, they focused on men and the duties and occupations of men. And so we hear all the warrior lore and hunting and you know, chiefdoms, but we forgot about the matriarchal part. And I think that's also the case when people talk about this labor movement, the farm workers labor movement. It was focused on the men, and Cesar's role in particular. Dolores is the co-founder, and that still is part of the narrative is still being left out. So I'm hoping that the film will bring people and inspire them to look at it and re-examine it and take in this whole other vista that, you know, that is the female part in that struggle.
Dolores, how did you feel, because you were one of the co-founders, you were discovered by Ross, you know, Fred Ross, who helped you get your organizing skills, community skills, and you were also the person who came up with the term "Sí se puede," yes we can, which President Obama made it his own. So having achieved all of this, how does it feel that you were not part of the narrative? How did you deal with it?
Well, to begin with, that isn't what one is working for. One is working to get poor people their rights, be they farm workers or just any other type of worker in the community. When you're doing this work, you want to empower people. It's not about empowering yourself. It's not about, publicity for yourself. It's about developing the leadership among the grassroots community, because there's leadership there, but you've got to get out there and organize them so that leadership can come to the surface, and you never know who the leader is going to be. So one is not working to put your mark on history or to be recognized. The recognition has to come from the people that you're organizing. I mean, when you ask an audience how many people know Fred Ross, most people don't even know who he is, because he was such a great organizer that he went out there and developed other people to become leaders. So it's not about, one's publicity. And even in the farm worker movement, we had people that were killed. We had 5 martyrs that people don't know their names. Nan Friedman, Najib Taifala, Young Arab, Juan de la Cruz, Rufino Contreras, Rene Lopez. Nobody knows who they are. The people that were beaten, the people who went to jail. So it's about, the accomplishments. It's about getting the work done. It's not about recognition. But I do want to say this. I think that it is important to recognize women's role in history, the labor union's role in history, the people of color's role in history, and shaping this country and shaping the world. And I guess if we need to say, okay, we do need to recognize people who have made achievements, who have made the changes, yes, then it is important. And I know that for women it's very hard to be able to claim their accomplishments, because we're not used to doing that. For men it's very natural. In fact, sometimes they claim what women do as their accomplishment. So in that respect, I think it's important. So it's not a personal thing about myself per se, but it's more important in terms of educating the rest of the world about what women can do.
You had something to add?
I was just going to say, in the process of making and telling the story, as a filmmaker, I felt like that was one of the things that we had to negotiate. And I think Dolores, like most activists and organizers, they are focused on the outside.
On the cause.
On the cause. They're not in it to turn a light on themselves. And so Dolores, I think, wanted the film and my questions to be directed towards the movement and the accomplishments of the collective. And so... And
not on her, and what she had contributed.
Yeah, and I think that's difficult for her as an organizer and activist, and also as a woman, to kind of get used to, okay, let me wear this and see the kind of bigger picture of how my story can illuminate organizing and movement building.
So I want to find out about the role of your mothers in very interesting ways. Dolores, your mother had a huge role and influence on you, and Peter, your mother too. She came from Peru, and she belonged to a tribe in Peru, an Indian, or should I say Indian or Native American? What is the right term?
I say Native, Indigenous.
Indigenous, okay.
First Peoples.
Okay, so both your mothers influenced you. In what ways? And in what ways did your mothers shape your political view or your view of life and how you need to work with people?
Well, my mother, number one, divorced my father because he was abusive, and brought us from New Mexico, where I was born, all the way to California. And so I knew that, she taught me that women have to stand up for themselves. She was a businesswoman, very good businesswoman. And, she worked 2 jobs until she could get enough money to get her own business. And she was very active in the community. She was a leader in the community, very soft-spoken, very gentle woman, but very strong woman.
So that's where you get the soft-spoken side from your mother, because she was not strident but soft?
No, she was much softer than myself, much more gentle than myself.
You're very soft.
Yeah.
You're not strident.
Yeah. And then she also, with my brothers, we had an equal opportunity home. My brothers had to wash the dishes, they had to make the beds and mop the floors, because my mother worked all the time. And so all of us had to do the housework, but I never had to serve my brother a plate of food never had to iron any of my brothers a shirt or anything. So, both of my brothers were better cooks than I am. But, she made sure that everything was shared equally. And that was a very important lesson for me, because then that's the way I was able to raise my own children.
So it never struck you when you started working and becoming an activist that men were different? You just thought you were on an equal footing?
Absolutely. And then as my mother was, she was the dominant person. And in fact, when I went to Delano to work with the farm workers, I had to kind of, you might say, I had to respect the culture. And, a lot of things that I would have done back in I grew up in Stockton, I didn't do when I was in Delano, because the culture was very different. And the machismo was a lot stronger, something I never grew up with, because my mother was the dominant figure in our family.
And what about you, Peter? Your mother, she was an activist, Alcatraz, occupation.
Well, I'm a great believer in what the Indians, the Hindu religion says, that the mother is the first guru, the first teacher. She inculcates the values and principles that the child first experiences. So that's certainly the case with my mom. I consider her, my first teacher, my guru in many ways. And she was she raised 5 children single-handedly.
So just like Dolores' mother, single mothers.
And balanced motherhood and activism. She would throw all of us in the back of a station wagon. We would go to a protest or a demonstration.
As children?
As children. And I remember sometimes my mom would be breastfeeding, while we're out there. And so
this is in the 60s?
This was in the 60s and 70s.
In San Francisco?
Beginning in '69,
okay.
During the occupation of Alcatraz, but later.
Right after the Summer of Love.
During the Summer of Love, yes, right after the Summer of Love, the fall.
Okay.
But I think having a strong mother and a movement person, it influences how you see the world and how you see yourself. And so,
do you see yourself as being empowered, or as somebody who needs to go out and fight for your rights? How do you see yourself?
I mean, my mother and her involvement in the movement and the Native movement cross-pollinated and was linked with the farm workers' struggle. I remember going down as a kid to La Paz in a caravan of Native Americans going to La Paz because there was some big meeting in Summit. And I remember the farm workers and the Black Panthers bringing food and clothing to the island to support the Native occupation. So just seeing all this happen, it was, okay, this is how it is. But as a child, coming from the dominant culture, and all of a sudden, brown is beautiful, red power, it was incredibly empowering. And I attribute that to my mother.
You also mentioned about how you fought for the movement. There was this element of non-violence, and anytime you talk of non-violence, you think of Mahatma Gandhi. So were you all influenced by Gandhi's?
Completely. I read Gandhi when I was in college. I remember when he was killed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember when Gandhi was killed, and then when I met Cesar, I had no idea that he had also read Gandhi. And so when we were planning the union, before we started organizing the union, we talked about how it would be Gandhi's philosophy, and the ashrams that they had in India. And that kind of led us to the whole idea that we had to live in poverty, because if we wanted to do Gandhi's philosophy, we could not make more money than the workers did, and that we had to live like them. And the whole idea of the marches, we see the March to Sacramento, that was Gandhi. Caesar's fast that he did 3 fasts, without any food. 2 of them for 25 days, and the last one for 36 days. And I mean, the whole philosophy of Gandhi was so strong. And when our martyrs were killed, the 5 people that were killed in our movement, what we did is Caesar asked everybody to fast for 3 days. Because he didn't want anybody to resort to violence against the people that had killed our martyrs. And so the Gandhi philosophy was extremely strong. And in fact, before Caesar passed away, there were 2 things that we had wanted to do. And one of them was to, go back to communities and form the ashram. In fact, where we lived at La Paz, so where Peter said he went as a child, that was like a community where everybody that we worked, any money that we raised all went to the union. Everybody, we got $5 a week and our subsistence, but it was a community pretty much on the Gandhian style.
Self-reliant.
Yeah, and then Cesar stopped eating meat. You know, he became a vegetarian. So he was a complete devotee of Gandhi, and he read everything on Gandhi that you could find. I mean, his library had every single book on Gandhi. And the one thing he was always, how did he organize? How did he organize? This is what he was looking for. And so Gandhi's philosophy was it was really part of our movement, completely part of our movement.
How did you discover Gandhi's book in your college library?
I don't remember where I got the book, but I remember reading it and reading about how he handled the racism, you know, when he went to Britain and the way that they treated him. And I thought, this is the stuff that I was living as a young, you know, 17, 18-year-old, you know. This is what I was living, the thing that Gandhi had gone through. And so it had an incredible, I must have read the book on Gandhi maybe 3 times, you know, because it had so many lessons for me and ways that I could cope with the racism that I was living.
Okay. And what about you, Peter? How did you discover Gandhi?
I was first exposed to Gandhi as a kid in the public schools. You know, they would show the old newsreels and give you kind of like the basic kind of preamble to the civil rights movement and how he influenced King. I mean, he had a tremendous influence on King. And I think the black civil rights movement in general had a huge impact on all subsequent social movements, whether it's the women's movement, the environmental movement, the farm workers movement. I think there are linkages and connections there, and they're directly tied and linked to what came out of India and the whole philosophy of ahimsa, nonviolence. And one of the things that struck me, and also I feel one of Dolores' reluctances to acknowledge and take credit for it, it also is connected to Gandhi, and that's the idea of seva, that in
service.
As a form of worship, you offer service to all life. But the thing about seva, in order for it to have and accumulate power, you can't claim the fruit of your actions and display it to the world. You offer it and you do it silently. Selflessness. And I think both Cesar and Dolores tried to bring that idea to the movement. And so I see the movement, like the American Indian movement, there was a spiritual foundation. It's a social movement, but it had a very spiritual core. And if you look at the fasting that Cesar underwent, and Dolores underwent, and all other members, when you do tapas like that,
meditation,
and you make it an offering and you direct it towards something, you create power. It's a spiritual
energy.
Force. It's a moral force that cannot be resisted, and people still use that tactic today. So I think the influence of Gandhi it can't be minimized. It's huge.
Yeah, and I don't think nonviolence is not a tactic, it's a philosophy.
Yeah, it's a philosophy.
It's a philosophy.
It's a
like,
way of life.
Yeah, it's a philosophy, and like in the farmworker movement, you know, we had an education, training, and a school, and everybody in there had to learn how to do meditation. They all had to do yoga. I mean, Cesar did yoga.
This is in the 60s?
Yeah, well, throughout the movement, I mean, from the time we started, all of us living communally at La Paz, we call it the Peace La Paz. The town is really King, California. But in all of the instructions that they had with the different, lessons that we taught people, one of them was on meditation, one of them was on yoga as part of the whole issue of nonviolence. Cesar did yoga every single day of his life, and he meditated every single day of his life. In fact, the night before he died, people that were with him say that he was doing yoga that night before he died in his meditation. Every morning he would get very early and do his meditations. And I was very fortunate because I grew up in Stockton, California, which is the place of the first Sikh temple in the United States of America, and it was right down the street by where I lived.
So did you ever step into the temple?
I didn't really. We used to pass by in front of it every single day, but we never stepped inside. But I would like to do that someday, because now my friends that I have in Bakersfield, California, everybody talks about that temple. But I have been to the temples, because my son Fidel, Dr. Fidel Huerta, his mentor is Dr. Amin, who is an Indian doctor.
So one of the things when I was watching the movie is you talk about Filipino farm workers and other farm workers. And I'm sitting there, what about Indian farm workers? Were there any Indian farm workers?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a lot of Indian farm workers, both in the Central Valley, and many of the Indian farm workers married Mexican women.
Yes.
So we have a lot of great friends that are, you might say, Hindu Mexican. I guess that's a good way to put it, right?
Yeah. Actually, Punjabi. Now they call themselves Chicano or Chicana Punjabi. So they identify, yes, because I've done some interviews.
I have to tell you a story.
Yeah.
Benjamin, my brother, our partner is Alpita Patel, whose family's from India, and she brought her father, who's an immigrant from India, to one of the screenings. And after the screening, he stood up, he says, "I am a Chicano."
He's a Gujarati.
And I have a very good friend. Her name is Raj Bauer, and she is the first Indian American from India that ever got elected to any kind of a position in Bakersfield, California. She was on the Arvin City Council. Now we know we have a couple of other people that have been elected, like Sacramento, now San Jose, but she was the first one, and she's a very dynamic woman, and she now sits on the air quality board here for the whole state of California.
Oh, wow.
I think that's also a really important aspect of not just in the film, but of our history. And I didn't realize it to the extent that I did until we did the research for the film, but you realize that the railroads, the agribusiness, it's all built upon the labor of immigrants from all over the world, and it's been going on for centuries. And so this idea that these newcomers are kind of coming in and taking over our country, that is such an old narrative. The real, true narrative, really, it's complex, it's diverse, and it's actually really beautiful.
We have to wind up the interview, so I'm going to ask, how did the idea for making the film come about, and why did Carlos Santana approach you to make a film?
Dolores could probably speak to this more than I, but...
No, but you were approached by Carlos Santana.
Yeah, I think Carlos and Dolores have had a long relationship.
Oh, okay.
And I think as a young man growing up in the Mission District, as a Latino, as an immigrant, he was inspired and influenced by the farm workers movement, as we all were. And then I think he had his own relationship with Dolores over the years, and so I think when we engaged over my last film, La Misión, he just called up and he said, "Yo, dude, you got to do this." and so I think he saw.
He didn't sing.
I think he saw connective tissue in that story, and this story, and so it was really. But it was his idea, and I think he has his own personal story has been touched and influenced by Dolores. He calls Dolores his Reina de Luz, his Queen of Light.
Oh, okay. So, do you want to share your relationship with Carlos Santana?
Yeah, well, we go way back with Carlos, when he was a young musician here, because I was in charge of the boycott here in San Francisco, and we actually did the first concert that he did with Bill Graham here in San Francisco. I think that was back in 1969.
Okay.
And
your mom was protesting.
Yeah, right. And he, so Carlos was very active, very supportive of Cesar, and he did a concert for my foundation. It was at my 80th birthday party, and I think Carlos, I think he has a certain sensitivity about women, for his daughter, Angelique, and I think is there
Angelica.
Angelica, so, I have a granddaughter named Angelique. So, Angelica, he has a certain sensitivity about women, and so I was rather thrilled that he wanted to do this film, and he wanted to highlight my involvement and my role in the farm workers movement. I think the film is extremely important because it's very relevant, and who knew when Peter was making the film that we would be in the situation that we're in right now. And so the messages that are there, we have so many of the same issues that, you know, we were talking about in the 60s and the 70s that we're still working on today. And a lot of the gains that we made have been rolled back. But I do believe that all of these organizations are stronger today than they were back in the 70s, all of the progressive organizations. And I believe this film is going to really ask people to be more engaged and to become more active so that we can then make sure that we're going to have a better world. Just like all of the activism of the 60s and the 70s, we were able to make so many changes. And those changes are being rolled back, but I believe that we're going to be very strong. And the film is going to really help us make this happen.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sí se puede.
Sí, sí puede. Yes, we can. Thank you.
And Namashavaya.
You're into Hinduism, it looks like. Thanks for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can catch them on our YouTube channel. We'll be back again next week with another edition of our show. Until then, goodbye.